Welcome to Beneath the Surface, the Dark Side of Crime. In today's chilling episode, we take you to Dartford, a small town in the UK that was forever changed by the brutal murder of 16-year-old Claire Tiltman. Her life was cut short in a savage act that shocked the community, and for years her killer remained free. But through relentless investigation and the unwavering dedication of those who loved her, the truth would finally be revealed. Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking details of Claire's murder, the impact it had on her family and friends, and the long journey to justice. This case serves as a reminder that sometimes the darkness hides in plain sight, and the fight for justice can take years, but it's always worth it. Stay tuned as we dive into the tragic story of Claire Tiltman. Chapter 1: The Discovery. The evening of January 18th, 1993, seemed like any other night in Dartford. The cold air bit into the skin, and a light drizzle hung in the air. It was a typical winter evening, the kind where the streets were quiet, and the town appeared to be winding down for the night. Michael Godfrey and his colleague Ron were driving down London Road in Greenhive, Dartford, on their way home from a late shift. But then something caught Michael's attention. At the side of the road, he saw a figure, hunched over, motionless, and seemingly struggling for breath. Initially, Michael assumed it was just another pedestrian, someone who had perhaps collapsed due to the cold or exhaustion. But something didn't seem right. The figure wasn't moving like someone simply waiting for help. Without hesitation, Michael pulled the car to the side and leapt out, his heart racing. Ron, following suit, rushed to call 999 from a nearby pub, while Michael approached the figure. What he found made his stomach drop. A young girl, no older than 16, lay crumpled on the cold pavement, her face pale and covered in blood. Her breathing was shallow, barely noticeable. As Michael knelt down beside her, he could feel the chilling reality that this wasn't a simple accident. The blood pooling around her mouth was a sure sign of something much darker. She had been violently attacked. Michael, in a panic, checked her back for any signs of spinal injury, but found none. But as he moved her slightly, he saw the horrific reality. Blood was dripping from her mouth and soaking into her clothes. In that moment, Claire Tiltman's life was slipping away. Despite his best efforts, she stopped breathing. Desperate, Michael began performing CPR, his hands shaking as he tried to save her. The ambulance arrived shortly after, but it was clear. Claire was gone. The paramedics confirmed her death, and at 7 p.m., just days after her 16th birthday, Claire Tiltman was officially declared dead. Chapter 2: The First Clues. The immediate aftermath of Claire's death was chaotic, but the search for answers began almost immediately. The area was sealed off as police forensic teams began their work. With the limited evidence at the scene, the investigators knew they had to work quickly to piece together the story of what had happened. The initial findings were disturbing. Claire had been attacked in an alleyway off London Road, an area that many residents would consider safe. The location raised questions. Why had Claire been there? What had led her to that spot? The police began canvassing the area, hoping to find witnesses who might have seen something. But the results were minimal. There were no clear eyewitnesses to the crime, and forensic evidence was scarce. The only physical evidence was a set of footprints near the alley, but they didn't lead to anything definitive. It was clear that whoever had committed this crime had taken great care to avoid leaving anything behind. One piece of evidence that did emerge was the brutal nature of the attack. Claire had been stabbed repeatedly, with some of the wounds as deep as 15 centimeters. This was not a random act of violence. It was personal, and it was vicious. The police began to suspect that the person responsible for this crime might be someone who knew Claire. The fear that the killer could be someone from her own circle of acquaintances began to set in. The hunt for the killer intensified, but as the days passed, the case went cold. The only leads were vague sightings of a man in a light-colored jacket near the scene of the crime. But who was he? Was he the killer, or just another bystander who had seen the aftermath of the brutal attack? Chapter 3. A community in shock. As the days went by, the news of Claire's death spread like wildfire through Dartford. The town had never seen anything like this before. Claire had been a beloved student at Dartford Grammar School, known for her vivacious personality and her kind, generous heart. To say her death shook the community was an understatement. Her parents, Cliff and Linda, were left reeling from the loss of their only child, a girl with so much promise and so many dreams for the future. Claire had always been a shining light in the lives of those around her. She was described by her friends as feisty and fiercely loyal, with an infectious sense of humor. She had recently completed her GCSEs and was planning for the future. She had dreams of becoming a firefighter, a career she had always admired, and she had volunteered with the fire service as part of her Duke of Edinburgh award. At school, her friends struggled to process the loss. Joanne, one of Claire's closest friends, recalled how she was sitting in class when the news first came through. The announcement on the radio was clear. Someone had been murdered in Greenhive. But it wasn't until the head teacher came in and switched off the radio that the reality hit. Joanne and her classmates were informed that the victim was Claire Tiltman, one of their own. The sense of disbelief spread like wildfire through the school. It was a cold, brutal reminder that no one was safe, not even in the places they felt the most secure. The grief was almost unbearable for Claire's family. Cliff and Linda were devastated, not just by the loss of their daughter, but by the uncertainty of who could have done this to her. The town was left in shock, and the once peaceful streets of Dartford now felt like a place where danger could strike at any moment. Chapter 4. The connection to previous attacks. As police investigators worked tirelessly to find a lead, a disturbing connection began to emerge. Investigators looked back at similar crimes in the area, particularly a horrific attack that had taken place in 1988. In that case, a young woman had been abducted, violently assaulted, and left for dead in a quarry nearby. She had been stabbed multiple times and left to die, but miraculously, she survived. The similarities between this attack and Claire's murder were undeniable. Both women had been attacked in isolated areas. Both had been stabbed multiple times, and both victims had shown signs of being stalked. This connection raised alarms among the detectives working on Claire's case. Could the same person have committed both attacks? The police began to wonder whether Claire's murder was part of a pattern. Could the killer have been lying in wait, watching his victims from the shadows before striking without warning? It was a chilling thought, and one that drove the investigation forward. The fear that the killer might strike again loomed over the community like a dark cloud. Chapter 5. The Witnesses and the False Leads continued. As the investigation progressed, the police faced a growing sense of frustration. Despite the community's efforts to assist, every lead seemed to lead nowhere. The most promising of these leads came from witnesses who claimed to have seen a man near the crime scene on the night of Claire's murder. One witness, a local shopkeeper, described a man with dark, curly hair, wearing a light-colored jacket, walking down the street near the time Claire was attacked. This seemed to match the descriptions that had been given by others. But when the police re-interviewed these witnesses, their accounts began to change. The initial witness who had mentioned the zebra crossing now had a completely different recollection of the timeline and the details of the man's appearance. It seemed that, as time passed, memories became clouded by the trauma of the event. The inconsistencies led to mounting skepticism about the reliability of these witnesses. The conflicting statements further muddied the investigation. The police had no choice but to consider the possibility that some of the witnesses might be misremembering or exaggerating the details in their efforts to help. It was a blow to the case, especially considering how little physical evidence had been left behind at the crime scene. Despite this, Detective Inspector Rob Vincent and his team pressed forward. They understood that not every piece of the puzzle could fit together immediately, but they couldn't afford to give up. For them, Claire's case was not just another file on their desk. It was a tragedy that had rocked the community and destroyed the lives of her family. They knew they had to find the truth. Chapter 6. The Funeral and the Haunting Realization. Expanded. The day of Claire's funeral arrived, and the community came together to mourn the loss of a young life taken too soon. Her family and friends gathered at Elum Crematorium in Dartford to say their final goodbyes. The weight of grief hung heavily in the air. For Cliff and Linda, this day would forever be etched in their memories, not just as the day they buried their daughter, but as the day they were confronted with the haunting reality that Claire's killer might have been among the mourners. The atmosphere at the funeral was thick with sorrow. Over 200 people attended, each struggling to come to terms with the senseless loss. Her friends, classmates, and neighbors tried to find solace in the gathering, but it was impossible to escape the gnawing fear that lingered in the background. Was the killer present? Was the person responsible for Claire's death standing in the same room, pretending to grieve while secretly hiding their guilt? Claire's parents, Cliff and Linda, couldn't shake the gut-wrenching thought that someone they knew might have been involved in their daughter's murder. Every face they saw as they scanned the crowd seemed to hold a potential answer, someone who could finally bring them the justice they so desperately needed. But no one knew for certain. Even during the funeral, the mystery remained unresolved, and the pain of uncertainty added an unbearable layer to their grief. It wasn't just the fact that Claire's killer was at large that weighed heavily on her family. It was the thought that they could have been standing next to that person, sharing in the grief, unknowingly. The more they thought about it, the more surreal and terrifying it became. Claire's mother, Linda, later admitted that during the funeral, she had a terrible feeling in the pit of her stomach, a dark premonition that the killer was nearby. It was a feeling she could not shake, and it would torment her for years. Chapter 7. A Cold Case and a New Lead. Expanded. The years following Claire's murder were filled with frustration, confusion, and sadness. The case had gone cold. The police were no closer to catching her killer, and with each passing year, the case seemed more and more like an unsolvable mystery. For Claire's parents, each anniversary of her death felt like a fresh wound. They struggled to hold on to the hope that someday justice would be served. But as time wore on, that hope began to dim. But then, in 1995, a glimmer of hope emerged. Another brutal attack occurred just a few miles from where Claire had been murdered. A woman was violently assaulted in a manner that mirrored Claire's own murder, stabbed multiple times in an isolated location, her life taken from her in an instant. The similarities between the two attacks were chilling. Could it be the same person? Could the killer have returned after all these years? The police quickly reopened the investigation, and it was then that a new lead came to light. A witness, a young man who had been delivering leaflets in the area, came forward with a description of a white Ford car that had been seen near the scene of the second attack. The car was registered to Colin Ash Smith, a local milkman. Colin had been questioned by the police in connection with Claire's murder early on, but at that time, there had been no substantial evidence to link him to the crime. This new lead was enough to convince the investigators to revisit Colin Ash Smith as a suspect. But the question remained, what did he know? Why had he been in the area at the time of both attacks? The more the police dug into his background, the more unsettling details emerged. Chapter 8, The Diary and the Dark Truth, expanded. The investigation into Colin Ash Smith took a darker turn when police searched his home. In his bedroom, tucked away in a drawer, they discovered something chilling: a diary. This wasn't just any ordinary diary. It was a detailed account of his violent thoughts and fantasies. Colin's writings were graphic and disturbing, filled with fantasies of power, control, and violence against women. In the diary, Colin detailed his past attacks, including the 1988 quarry assault and the 1995 stabbing. What struck the investigators the most was the cold, almost detached way in which Colin wrote about his violent acts. It was as if he viewed these assaults as conquests, as though they were part of a sickening game. The diary entries spoke of his obsession with knives, his desire to hurt others, and his enjoyment of the power he felt when he inflicted pain. As the police read through the pages, they began to see a pattern of behavior that could not be ignored. But even with the diary in hand, there was still no concrete evidence linking Colin directly to Claire's murder. The investigation had to proceed cautiously, but the growing body of evidence was impossible to ignore. Colin had been in the area on the night of Claire's murder, and his writings suggested that he had been planning further attacks. As investigators delved deeper into his past, they uncovered even more disturbing revelations. Colin had attended Claire's funeral. He had mingled with the crowd, offering condolences, while secretly harboring a deep satisfaction from her death. It was as though he had reveled in the tragedy, knowing that the people around him were grieving for the loss he had caused. Chapter 9, The Final Breakthrough, expanded. By the end of 1995, the police had gathered enough evidence to formally question Colin Ash Smith. His alibi, initially supported by his mother, began to unravel. The mother's testimony, which had placed Colin at home during the time of Claire's murder, was exposed as a lie. The police uncovered new evidence, including the fact that Colin had been in the area at the time of the attack. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit. The breakthrough came when Stefan, a former cellmate of Colin's, provided critical information. During their time together in prison, Colin had mentioned the murder of Claire Tiltman, and the more Stefan thought about it, the more he realized that Colin had been involved in the crime. He recalled conversations in which Colin boasted about his violent tendencies and even spoke about Claire's murder with a sense of detachment. Stefan's testimony, combined with the physical evidence, was enough to bring Colin to trial. The once elusive killer was now facing justice, and the community could finally begin to heal. Chapter 10. Justice at Last. In December 2014, nearly 2 decades after Claire's murder, Colin Ash Smith's trial finally began. The weight of the years of pain and uncertainty had taken a toll on Claire's family. Cliff and Linda, who had devoted themselves to finding justice for their daughter, had both passed away, never getting the closure they so desperately needed. However, Claire's friends, including her best friend Joanne, who had been by her side in her final moments, stood by throughout the trial, ready to see the justice that Claire had been denied for so many years. As the trial unfolded, the true horror of Colin's actions came to light. The police had uncovered a detailed diary in which Colin had chronicled his violent fantasies and attacks. The diary painted a picture of a man obsessed with power, control, and violence, detailing his desire to hurt women and reveling in the control he felt during the assaults. His disturbing writings, combined with the forensic evidence and witness testimonies, made it impossible for Colin to deny his involvement in Claire's murder. The most chilling revelation came when it was revealed that Colin had attended Claire's funeral. He had mingled with her family and friends, offering condolences, all the while knowing he was the one responsible for their pain. His twisted sense of satisfaction and control extended to every part of the crime, from the brutal attack on Claire to his ability to remain undetected for so long. During the trial, the defense attempted to portray Colin as a man who had been misunderstood, claiming he was simply struggling with personal issues. But the evidence told a different story, a story of a man who had carefully planned and executed Claire's murder and continued his violent behavior, unabated, for years after. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension as the verdict was delivered. Colin Ash Smith was found guilty of the murder of Claire Tiltman. The sentencing was swift and final. He was given a life sentence with a minimum of 21 years before he could be considered for parole. It was a bittersweet moment for Claire's loved ones. Though justice had been served, it was a moment tainted by the knowledge that Claire's parents would never live to see their daughter's killer held accountable. The trial was not only an emotional journey for those who had known Claire, but it also served as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Her friends, family, and the investigators, who had tirelessly worked on her case, could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the man who had taken Claire's life would never walk free again. But for Claire's loved ones, the pain of her loss would never fade. Justice, though a long time coming, had brought some measure of peace, but the hole left by her absence would remain forever. Claire Tiltman's tragic and senseless murder left a deep scar on Dartford, the community that had once felt safe and secure. Her death shattered lives, those of her parents, her friends, her schoolmates, and the entire town. But in the years following her murder, Claire's story became one of resilience, love, and an unwavering commitment to finding justice. Her parents, Cliff and Linda, fought for justice with every fiber of their being. They were determined to see their daughter's killer caught, even when the evidence was scarce and the leads were few. The toll this took on them was immense. They lived with the constant ache of not knowing, of wondering who had taken their daughter's life, and whether they would ever be brought to justice. Tragically, they didn't live long enough to see that justice, but their love for Claire and their dedication to her memory never wavered. Claire's friends, especially Joanne, who had been by her side during her final moments, never stopped searching for the truth. They stood by her family throughout the years, supporting them in every way they could, never giving up on the hope that one day Claire's killer would be caught. The strength and courage of her friends played a crucial role in keeping Claire's case alive, even when the investigation seemed to stall. The final conviction of Colin Ash Smith brought some sense of closure, but it was clear that justice was never truly complete. Claire had been a bright, beautiful young woman with a world of possibilities ahead of her. She had dreams of becoming a firefighter, of making a difference in the world. Those dreams were cruelly ripped away from her in the most brutal of ways. And though Colin's conviction meant that he would never hurt anyone again, it did nothing to bring back the vibrant young woman who had been taken so unjustly. As time went on, Claire's memory continued to live on. Her friends and family held on to her legacy, ensuring that her name would never be forgotten. In 2003, a memorial plaque was placed in her honor along London Road, marking the place where she had been taken from the world. The plaque was a symbol of the strength of the Dartford community and their commitment to remembering Claire and the injustice she had suffered. Her story was not just about the darkness of her death, but about the light she had brought to those around her. It was about the people who never stopped fighting for her and the love that would never fade, no matter how many years passed. Claire Tiltman was more than a victim. She was a symbol of hope, of perseverance, and of the fight for justice, even when it seemed impossible. Her story serves as a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, love and justice can prevail. And while the scars left by her murder may never fully heal, the fight to remember her, to honor her life, and to seek justice for her will continue. Claire Tiltman's legacy lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the determination of those who fought for justice in her name